Webster, welcome back.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me just point out that I have written about half a dozen books. So maybe that's not, it's not as much as some, but...
no, they're very important. I
invite people to take a look. You can find it at tarpley.net.
Yeah. No, they're more contemporary in many ways than your knowledge. Your knowledge is so deep. I don't know.
But I've also got that collection of essays, which is on my website, the Against Oligarchy, and that's the one that takes you back to Diocletian.
Ah, very good. Okay, I forgot about that. Yep.
Well, it also does the story of the Reformation and the wars of religion in Europe and so forth.
Yeah.
And I would actually invite people to take a look at my website, because tonight I have to talk about things that might make it good if you had a map in front of you. You'd get more out of it. And if you want to see a map, I've put up a couple of maps, which you can find at tarpley.net, and they're sort of the top story. So if you want to follow along in a couple of minutes, maybe we do that, because it makes a very interesting comparison, and it's what I would count as some kind of a discovery of my own made here in the last couple of weeks, comparing the American Civil War and the beginning of the First World War. But first of all,
a quick question: how's my distant cousin Rense doing in Rome?
Well, he of course is he's anybody's guess still, and there are many elements that are not so encouraging, but there is hope, and the one thing that gives us hope is this report that we've gotten a couple of times now, that the Russians are working on Renzi. And it means, of course, that the reason the Anglo-Americans wanted to get Berlusconi out at all costs was that Berlusconi was a close personal friend of Putin, and Italy was acting as an advocate, much more than Germany, much more than stupid Merkel. He was acting as an advocate for Russia inside the European Union. And it would have been very hard to have the current hysterical crisis if Berlusconi had still been there, because he would always say no, right? When they said, you need a tremendous austerity program, and the answer from him was no. So they organized the coup d'etat. That's the coup d'etat of November 2011 that brought in a complete puppet of the International Monetary Fund and Goldman Sachs, this guy by the name of Monti, M-O-N-T-I. But now we've got Renzi, who has a certain amount of popular support, right? Got 41% in the European elections, so that's pretty good. And he has now just chosen the foreign policy chief of the European Union. And you remember this was this awful British woman, this embodiment of the dumb cow, right? Baroness Ashton, who was a complete, cold warrior, warmonger, and contemptible person at the same time. Now we have this interesting lady, Mogherini, and Mogherini has been the Italian foreign minister. So she's Federica Mogherini, and she's now the foreign policy boss of the European Union. And the way this happened in that European Union meeting on Saturday was that all of these, virulently Russophobic Eastern European demagogue regimes, right, where these people can't deliver the goods, they can't deliver full employment, rising standards of living, decent wages, anything like that, full employment. No, they can't do that. So they deliver anti-Russian hysteria, right? And this is Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, where Varkey has been until just a couple of minutes ago. And then Poland, of course. Hungary escapes in a certain interesting way, but there are others, right? Romania and Bulgaria, I'm afraid, are not going very well.
This Webster, this anti-Russian war drum beating is obscenely transparent. I'm really shocked that the controlled media gets away with it as much as it does. It's really
Jeff. I would urge you. You have a soapbox of some dimensions. You better get a parade of people on there who are warning against the horrors of war, right? You can get people on there who could talk about what a Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missile looks like when it explodes, why you don't want to be near that, right? What the stakes are, what demagogues We've got this Petro Poroshenko.
Well, I call him
Poroshenko, Jeff.
Good.
Poroshenko. Good. We call him Poroshenko because his policies are obscene. He's the Ukrainian demagogue president.
He's despicable. Well, we call him. I call him Porky here. Porky and his pigs.
Petro. Petro, because maybe they think he's got oil, so he'd become a
God
Petro.
Only knows.
Regime.
He's got chocolate. We know that. Look, this whole thing of.
But maybe that's connected to the oil, right? Maybe the chocolate, they've invented chocolate that doesn't come from
God
milk.
Only knows.
Some other dark substance.
They're
like
stashing,
oil.
Gas. Europe is stashing gas. Now Porky is talking about cutting the power down to Crimea this month. So this guy, he sat on a broomstick or something because he's got a problem. His mouth does not stop running.
That cannot, they're going to deliver genocidal austerity as demanded by the International Monetary Fund.
That's the game.
This is what these poor dupes, the Maidan dupe collection, got out there saying, we want to join Europe. Well, you want to join Europe, they will treat you like Greece.
We want to join penury. Yeah.
You're going to be put through the ringer, right? You're going to have your unions will be smashed, your social safety net will be shredded, workers' rights gone, foreigners buy the Black Earth region, the pipeline distribution system will be taken by foreigners, the coal and iron ore of the Donbass and Krivoy Rog, all of that will be looted, and you'll be left with nothing but your eyes to cry with. That's what it means to join Europe in the age of the Troika, right? You're dealing with the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, right?
Here's a real weird, obtuse angle to this thing that nobody talks about. Not that it's a big secret, but no one talks about it. The Russians have had for, I guess, 20 years now, the most awesome intercontinental ballistic missile of them all. It's called the Satan. It's huge. The top stage is full of warheads. It's about as big as a medium-sized school bus. And they have them staged, I don't know how many, but they have some of them staged in the Ukraine. In Ukraine. The workers in Ukraine who take care of these missiles have promised Russia that they will continue to service them and keep them ready. This is a weird thing. So you've got thermonuclear Russian ICBMs in Porky's Ukraine. So figure that one out, folks.
The idea that Ukraine could be an independent country was, of course, absurd from the word go. And what you see, they can't maintain their balance of payments because they're so dependent on this Russian gas. When this was one country, this whole issue of the balance of payments did not arise. But since they've insisted on this
$7 billion behind in their gas payments
of the former Soviet Union, it's just not viable. And it never will be. And there's nothing that can be done about that. And it's a fictitious, synthetic country. Never existed on the map before 1918, and it's a creation of the German General Staff under Ludendorff, who's also the guy who invented Hitler. So Ludendorff invented Hitler, he invented Ukraine, and so forth. So it's out of the same think tank.
Well, that's the way it was back then.
And I think it's time for people in this country to start saying, look, we have no stake in this. We have no alliance with these people. We do not want an alliance. Think of the one-sided nature of this Yatsenyuk. He says now Ukraine wants to join NATO. Well, what's in it for us here in the U.S., so to speak, right? In other words, the Ukrainians come on the scene and they say, you've got to support us because we're for democracy. And apparently the price of this is a likely general war, quite possibly a nuclear war. So what insane calculation could ever bring the United States to say, yes, we'll guarantee you? And, of course, it's all completely one-sided, right? The United States derives no benefit, nothing conceivably worth it, and the downside is infinite, right? The upside is non-existent, and the downside is infinite. Who in his right mind would want to do this?
Oh, I agree. Now,
and this, of course, goes for Georgia. It goes for Moldova and these other places, and even these Baltic republics. Again, this is the land of the demagogues. This is where Russophobia is the stock in trade of the ruling parties. They have very large, 25% Russian minorities whom they mistreat, and that's part of their political game, right? That they constantly provoke tensions with this very large Russian minority. And one of these days, that's going to boil over too. So I think this a couple of people in particular this past week have been especially impudent, right? Willing to fight to the last American is the way I always like to put it.
That's
right?
the truth.
They're going to be so courageous because they know that the U.S. is going to take it on the chin.
We'll be right behind you. Yep.
Right, we'll be right behind you. So this is this woman, Grybauskaitė. This is this hag, Haradan leader of Lithuania, this blonde woman she was mouthing off, "We're already at war with Russia. This is war already. War, war." And then the Polish president, Komorowski, made this statement that the Russians want Cossack Europe dominated by the Cossacks, I suppose, the cavalry. And then he got into this, he switched from that one to the idea of not appeasing Hitler again. And I have to point out, the first country to sign a friendship accord with Hitler was Poland, under Marshal Pilsudski, who had some good qualities, but nevertheless he did this. The Polish-Hitler Friendship Treaty of 1934 was the first one, and when Hitler went after Czechoslovakia and carved it, Poland was right there to grab a piece, as was Hungary, as were others, right? So, and then we find out from this posturing Prime Minister of Poland, right, Tusk, T-U-S-K.
The Tusk
He's
man.
now become the president. Yeah. He's replaced Van Rompuy. Rompuy, the broken man, right, of Europe, the president of the European Commission, he's out, or will be out, and then in comes this Tusk. Yeah. And it turns out that Tusk's grandfather was a Nazi. And there are pictures of him with his swastika uniform and all of his Nazi regalia. And this guy is now giving the world lectures about democracy and freedom and
it's unbelievable.
And so forth. And it's all based on the idea that the poor American schmucks and slobs will pay with their lives, and these demagogues can prance around and talk about their wonderful service to democracy and freedom and international law. Don't forget that. So
it's true. All right, we got this quack regime in Kiev. We've got obvious Russian involvement with the partisans and the resistance in the east. There are ultimatums being thrown back and forth at lower and mid levels. I don't know where this is going to go, but it's not pretty. There was a video I got 2 days ago which appeared to show the sinking of two ships. Did you see that video?
Well, there were a couple of Ukrainian Coast Guard ships that got tagged by these the pro-Russian party. They're moving along the northern coast.
Well, somebody was flying jets. This was done by jets. You could see the jets. You could see the flyover, the reconnaissance. They swung around, did a clockwise loop, counterclockwise loop, and then one flew right over the second ship, and kaboom! It's right there on video. I've got it if you want to see it.
Possible, quite possible. I don't know. The account I saw was that there'd been some land-based artillery.
They claimed it was artillery, but no, these were jets. You could hear them. There were two women on shore with some kind of a smartphone digitally taping it. I'll send you the video. It's very interesting.
Okay, well, anyway, what I'd like to do, though, I have to do a certain division of labor, right? I look forward to this program because I got to talk about some history, and this is a place to do it, if I can.
Yeah.
I think one way to study these events and to see them in their full potential is to be constantly looking back at, in this case, 1914, and the question of terrorism, right, which is always prominent now. We have ISIS, and we have the idea that from the Kiev Poroshenko point of view, the campaign of mass murder that the Kiev fascist forces are carrying out or trying to carry out now in eastern Ukraine. They call that an anti-terror operation, right? You can watch the Ukrainian news. They call it an ATO, right? The ATO zone, right?
By the way, militarily, tactically, things changed in the last week and a half.
You've got, I count now, 7 encircled Ukrainian fascist units.
Correct. The whole tactics have changed. The resistance is fighting an offensive war with large formations, and obviously they're getting a hell of an input of volunteers from Russia.
Yes, I think so. But you also have to remember that I think the Ukrainians became overconfident. They got overstretched. They were too far out in front. They were beginning to believe their own idiotic propaganda about their invincibility and their glory, right? Their glory.
That's right.
Slava. That's the one they like.
Remember? Rope-a-dope.
Rope-a-dope, but now they've been pocketed, right? They've been encircled.
They are. And
yes, and of course the question is, Putin has said we'll let you out of here through disarm, and you can go out through humanitarian corridors. And for some of these guys, some of them are right sector, right, Pravi sector fascists, who don't want to do that. But again, I got to go back because I got to get some things out into the world tonight.
Go to it.
I have to. By the time I get to my own program on Friday and then others after that, I've got to move along. And because I have new things now. Remember, last month we talked about that new document that showed King George V of Britain had told the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, in very early August 1914, the King says to the Foreign Secretary, Grey, you have got to find a reason. In other words, you've got to find a pretext to get Britain into the war against Germany. And then later, a couple of days later, the King sends Grey another message saying, Belgium is the answer, right? We're going to start screaming about Belgium and the Bosch and the atrocities of the Germans in Belgium, and on and on and on. This, you look at these two guys who have allegedly been beheaded, and I say allegedly because you don't see that and you don't know it.
These are very
I would also point
productions.
Out those guys put themselves into a suicidal position because both of these people, as far as I can tell, were there to provide pro-terrorist propaganda. Both of them were there writing that the terrorist rebels of Syria were great and Assad was bad, and down with Assad, and long live the terrorist rebels of Syria, who one morning got up and said, well, thanks for your propaganda services, but now we're taking you hostage.
They were intel operatives.
We're not Nusra anymore. We're now ISIS, so we have no margin for guys like you, and now we're going to use you. And again, I don't know, right? Did they have their heads cut off? Were they killed some other way? I can't tell. But the fact is, anybody who does that knows what they're risking. And this is not worth a war. This is not worth any kind of military operation. I would point out, although I'm not going to get hysterical about bombing a few of these ISIS characters, right? That's probably going to happen no matter what anybody does. But the thing is, it would be suicidal now to send back the Marines and so forth, precisely because you can deal with this in two ways, right? The one way is political and logistical. You put out an ultimatum that says, Turkey, you are a NATO member, right? This is now the big deal, right? Ukraine is not a NATO member. There's a big brouhaha in Eastern Europe, right? Some people are members of NATO, others are not. Being in NATO is a whole lot different from being out of it. But this is a reciprocal obligation. It's not just what the U.S. owes them. They owe us. And Turkey owes us a great deal. And what Turkey should deliver is close that border, cut off all commerce, all contact, money, support, weapons, volunteers, right? Anything.
I agree.
Close that border. Close the entire Turkish southern border, and you begin to starve out ISIS. The other thing, of course, is Turkey, thanks also to U.S. military aid, they are the second biggest recipient, I believe, after Israel, or they're always in competition with Egypt, or they were. I'm sure by now they're the second largest recipient. Turkey has a huge army, very capable army. Why doesn't the Turkish army cross into northern Iraq and maybe avoid the Kurdish zone so you don't violate the sensibilities of the Kurds?
They could broom
but go in
ISIS.
There and flatten ISIS. It's the easiest thing in the world.
I agree. I wonder
and then there's,
why.
of course, you want an army. The Syrians have an army, right? Moalem last week said, we will cooperate with any government to crush ISIS. Well,
okay. Let's go. All right, hold on just a second. We'll come right back with Webster Tarpley. Fascinating insights into current and past events that are all tied together. Back in a minute. Okay, back with Webster Tarpley. All right, Mr. T, go right ahead.
Just the climate of massive recourse to terrorism is something that we also see in the pre-1914 and then 1914 time, right before World War I. And I just wanted to evoke this a little bit, right? As you know, what I'm trying to argue, and I think I'm not exactly alone, but this is not the dominant mainstream quackademic point of view. What I'm arguing is that you have these Freemasonic networks that are generally assembled by or loyal to or inspired by King Edward VII of Great Britain, who was the head of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. So we're talking about the Scottish Rite, we're talking the York Rite, too, of the British, and then the Grand Orient of France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the Middle East, other Freemasonic groups, and then the Russian Okhrana, right, the Tsarist secret police. And that's essentially the substructure, right? What you see going into action in 1914 is something like this. And when people are aware of Sarajevo, right, that World War I somehow has something to do with this double assassination in Bosnia of the heir to the Austrian throne. Just wanted to go through, though, the pattern of assassinations and similar events. Sometimes it's not quite an assassination. It can be somebody gets wounded, an attempted assassination, and sometimes it's a character assassination. Right? It's the discrediting committee goes into office. Now, here's a fairly standard book, Europe's Last Summer by David Fromkin. Fromkin wrote that book, A Peace to End All Peace. It's not the worst. It's no analysis, but it has some interesting facts. And one of the things he has is a list of the prevalence of terrorism in probably the 2 decades before World War I. So he makes a list of who all had gotten killed. And generally killed by anarchists. Right? That's the cover story. And it's usually Italian anarchists, sometimes Russian anarchists, but anarchists, right? And the idea, of course, is that these are not just anarchists, but that they're steered by these Freemasonic networks, right? A lot of times these are, very, duped people who don't know what they're doing, but somebody else does. Sure. So here's who got killed. The president of France, Sadi Carnot, was assassinated in 1894. The Shah of Persia was assassinated in 1896. In that same year, it was the president of Uruguay getting killed, the prime minister of Spain in 1897, the president of Guatemala in 1898, and also the Empress of Austria in 1898. The president of the Dominican Republic in the following year of 1899, the King of Italy, Umberto, killed in 1900, President McKinley of the United States in 1901, the King and Queen of Serbia in 1903. That's interesting for us because that's carried out by the same guy who did Sarajevo, right? Colonel Apis Dimitrievich at the lowest level. Prime Minister of Greece, assassinated 1905. Prime Minister of Bulgaria, 1907. Prime Minister of Persia, Iran again, 1907. 1907, a big year. King of Portugal, 1908. Prime Minister of Egypt, 1910. Prime Minister of Russia, Stolypin, the last reformer, 1911. Prime Minister of Spain, 1912. President of Mexico, 1913. King of Greece, 1913. How about that? That's, so you can see that there's a network that's acting. Now, I haven't had time to go through and analyze each one of these cases, but what I can do is we just look at 1914 for a second. And again, jumping ahead to what I want you to start thinking about is start looking for terrorist actions. Any politician who happens to get killed, say, in the next couple of weeks and months, you have to entertain the hypothesis that this is somebody in Europe, say, who does not want war, who does not want the confrontation with Russia.
I think you're right.
And has some idea, okay?
Yeah, they're going to weed those people out.
Here's what we have in 1914, right? we've talked, I think, before about what happened Sarajevo, 28th of June, 1914. I just remind you that there were, as I think I did 2 months ago on your show, there were people in London waiting for the news, right? They kept saying, got any news from Sarajevo? Anything come in from Bosnia? We're waiting for big things. Have you seen the wires? And then if not, they'd be disappointed. There were also, according to some wartime reports I found from Austria, there were people in St. Petersburg, Russia, who were waiting for Franz Ferdinand and or his wife to get killed in the days leading up to June 28th, 1914. Right? And that's perfectly possible because they were on a kind of a tour of the province. Right? They could have been assassinated. Right? They were actually in Sarajevo a day or two before they got killed, and they sort of came in incommunicado for shopping, right, on a non-official.
Even back then, the network of people who had inside information, the whispers, the confidentiality shared, that people knew these things don't happen randomly, never.
And of course, the likely suspect is the Russian Okhrana, right? That you've got this thing called the Black Hand, Unity or Death. This is Colonel Apis and company. You have the Black Hand, which is an extremist terrorist group. It exists within other sort of more blurred kinds of formations, but these real hardliners are from the Black Hand, Colonel Apis, and that's sort of a satellite of the Russian Okhrana, and the connections go through the Russian embassy. So in many ways, if you're an Austrian, you could look at that and say, well, the Russians have been were a part of it. But now, here's the thing that I think people don't often hear, which I think I've assembled now up to a point. The other assassinations going on at the same time. And what you're going to find is that the people who tend to get killed in the summer of 1914 are people who are either against any war or they want their countries to be on the side of Germany and Austria, not Britain, France, and Russia. And the first one, I guess we can do this after the break, the commander of the entire Italian armed forces died 2 to 2.5 days after Sarajevo, most likely poisoned, and this is worth telling.
Coincidental stuff again, eh? All right, yes, those strange deaths, political deaths. Be right back with Webster in a minute. Hold on. Okay, let's get right back to our conversation with Webster Griffin Tarpley. Always fascinating. Go ahead.
So the terror wave of the summer of 1914, right? A whole series of strange deaths. Some of them obviously violent, and then some of them camouflaged, disguised. And the one I think a very important one is the chief of staff, the military commander of the entire Italian army, General Alberto Pollio, Pollio. This is almost unknown here in the U.S., but he was the commander. He was at the same level as Moltke of Germany, or Joffre of France, or Konrad von Hötzendorf of Austria, or Pershing, I guess, of the U.S., right? This is a top military guy. And he died on essentially between the night of June 30th and the morning of July 1st, 1914. And here's the problem. This guy was strongly in favor of Italy staying in the Triple Alliance, right? Staying with Germany and Austria and fighting against France and Russia and the British. And this is extremely important. This has something to do with the Battle of the Marne, which of course is the big battle, right? The biggest battle of human history up to that point was the First Battle of the Marne, and the anniversary for that is essentially next week. It starts about the 7th or the 8th of September and goes on for several days, depending on how you want to count it. You just have to remember, according to the basic Schlieffen Plan, the German military plan for dealing with France and then turning on Russia, Italy was going to contribute 12, count them, 12 divisions to the German attack on France. And these were, it means 4 Army Corps of 3 divisions each, right?
Big,
this is a great deal.
Yeah.
They were going to go across northern Italy to Verona, up the Brenner, right, across the Alps, through then across southern Germany and they were going to hold the Upper Rhine. In other words, from Switzerland, for 40 or 50 miles, that was all going to be taken over by the Italians, and they were going to be on the defensive. But this would have meant an additional German army at Paris, in the critical time of early September 1914, that could have made, and I obviously would have made, I think, the difference between success and failure. So what happened to Pollio? Before we even get to Pollio, you have to remember, Italy was a firm founding member of this Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And how come it wavered, and how come it eventually fell under the spell of Mussolini and then joined on the side of the Allies, right, in 1915? It helps if you've read A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, right? Think about that stuff on the Italian front. The poor Italians trying to attack up mountains, right?
Sure.
Really impossible stuff. Yeah. And then Caporetto, that's all in that movie, right? Take a look at it sometime, right? With Rock Hudson and everything. But anyway, here's the story. Italy was actually a founding member of the Triple Alliance, and they had King Humbert. King Humbert I was the founder of the Italian-Austrian part of that alliance, because he was he had many reasons for preferring Austria to France. Right, the Italians were very upset that the French had taken Tunisia, because the Italians thought they had some title to that, but the French said, "No, go to hell," and we're not going to give you anything. So at that point, Italy began gravitating towards Austria, and in this King Umberto, there were 3 assassination attempts. There was one in Naples in 1878. There was another one in Rome in 1897. And then finally the one that succeeded was in Monza, near Milan. It's where they have the Grand Prix, right? The racetrack
Monza.
For auto. Yeah. Monza. And that's 1900. So the king who would have been in favor of staying with Germany at all costs is dead. And instead we have Victor Emmanuel III, who is the king who's going to bring in Mussolini right after the war. So this guy is a Freemason. And of course, it's always interesting to remember that so many of these politicians were Freemasons, including Mussolini, including the guy who brought Italy into the war on the side of the British and French. He was a top Freemason. But of course, once he got into power, he knew how dangerous Freemasons were, and he tried to wipe them out, and he succeeded to a significant degree. So by the time 1914 rolls around, the king is this pro-British Freemason, Vittorio Emanuele III, no good, but you've still got the chief of staff, right, the top general, Pollio, is in favor of fulfilling the treaty obligations and sending the 12 divisions to go and help Germany, right, against the French. So what happens to him is he's in a hotel in Turin, Italy, right up in the northwest part of the country, right? You see the Alps all around.
Sure.
And he's in the Turin Palace Hotel. He has been out viewing some military exercises, starts feeling bad during the exercises, bring him back to the hotel. He's only got one assistant and bodyguard with him. This seems bad, although he's somebody who's got the habit of only telling people where he's going at the very last minute. He has some idea, I think, that he's in danger. So anyway, he ends up in this hotel. The hotel is a nest of the French intelligence service. And the hypothesis is the French intelligence service kills him. And the way they do it is with the help of the house physician, who administers some kind of opium and morphine injection. And then this famous waitress or maid, right? The maid, she's somebody who gets hired the day before. She works one day, the day the guy dies, and then she's gone, and she's never heard of again as long as anybody lives. So we had the maid for a day in the room of this top general, and of course he's dead then, right? He dies. Once he's dead, they bring in General Cadorna, who is the pro-British, pro-French butcher. He's the guy who gets everybody killed that you see in that movie farewell to arms, right? Trying to attack up the sides of mountains and things like this. I mean, things that only a lunatic could see.
Without air,
so there's Italy.
Cover.
Now, this is a very, very big deal. There's also a fleet that gives the British and the French quite a bit of pause, right? But the main thing is these 12 divisions that would have been, a tremendous thing for the Germans to have. And again, my approach to this thing is the only merciful outcome of this, by the time it got to 1914, was for it to be over as soon as possible. To be over, finished, done. And who wins is of less importance than get it over with, right? And probably the Germans are the only ones who could do it quickly. So they tend to, the hypotheses in this direction tend to center on them. How about this one? Russia, okay? In Russia, the important thing is get Russia into the war at all costs, right? That's what the British want, right? They've got to have Russia, and the French see it the same way. The French Freemasons. So the problem here, believe it or not, is Rasputin, right? The crazy monk, except maybe he's not so crazy. He's the one guy who's telling the Tsar in 1914 in July, he's telling him, make peace. Here's a little quote from Rasputin. He writes to the Tsar, or by means of a go-between, let Papa Nicholas not plan war, writes Rasputin, meaning the Tsar, right? Tsar Nicholas II. Let Papa Nicholas not plan war, for with war will come the end of Russia and yourselves, the Romanov dynasty, and you will lose to the last man.
Wow.
Now, this is good advice. This is the best advice that the Tsar got. But here's the interesting thing. In early July, right, less than 2 weeks after Sarajevo, and about 10 days after the death of the Italian Supreme Commander, old Rasputin is out there in the boondocks, and this woman comes up to him. Her name is Hiona Gusieva, and she's got a butcher knife, and she stabs him in the stomach. And this is the most serious assassination attempt before the final one, where the British do succeed in killing him. He is hospitalized for 7 weeks. He almost died. And, as I say, he was pushing pacifism, and they would stay out of this war. Don't join either side.
They must have operated on the guy to sew up the internal wounds.
Yeah, it's called laparotomy, opening up the body cavity and getting inside and fixing it up. So, according to Rasputin, the prime suspect is, well, there are two brothers, Ilyador Junkovsky, Dzhunkovsky, and Vladimir. Probably Vladimir is the more famous of the Junkovsky brothers, because Vladimir Junkovsky is nothing less than the head of the Okhrana. He's the, Alan Dulles, the head of the entire secret police, the J. Edgar Hoover, whatever you want to call him. And he's been the military governor of Moscow. So just at the moment when this hypnotic control that Rasputin had over the Tsarina, and the Tsarina, of course, domineering over the weak-willed, vacillating Tsar, this could have kept Russia out of the war, right? This would have been a great thing for Russia. But no, it had to be this way. Interesting, the writer people may have heard of, Maxim Gorky, right, was part of this assassination attempt on Rasputin. Very, very interesting. And, of course, the local district attorney declines to press charges. No trial. Now, let me just mention the last two. This is now France, right? You got to have, if you're from the British, you got to have the French in the war. The French Grand Orient agrees with you about this. So we have two people. I think we mentioned one of them. Jean Jaurès, right? Jaures.
Yeah.
He's a socialist leader. And he's the guy who says, well, we promised everybody that we were on the verge, if we're on the verge of a war, we will have a general strike. And he was organizing a general strike to stop the war. He was assassinated in Paris on 31st of July, 1914. They had a ceremony. Hollande went there a couple of weeks ago now. But the other one is also very interesting. This is Caillot, Caillaux. This is the former prime minister. He is a socialist, as is Jaurès, right, from the Second International, Social Democrat. And Caillaux is also somebody who is perfectly capable of saying, no war, right? We've had enough of this. This is going to be terrible. We don't want it. So what they've done with him is not to kill him, but to do the character assassination route. The Figaro, right? Le Figaro, the newspaper, main right-wing newspaper of France, even today, right?
Yeah.
Published a series of letters, which were allegedly Caillaux's letters to his mistress. Oh, what a scandal. So he had to quit, right? He had to step down from all of his government posts and everything. Except that, and this, I don't know whether this is planned or not. I rather think not. At the height of these letters being published, Caillaux's wife shows up at the Figaro, and she says, may I speak to the editor-in-chief?
Yeah.
And they take her in there, and she pulls out a gun and kills the editor-in-chief. So this had the effect of focusing even more attention on this thing. But the problem, of course, was then that with Caillaux's wife going on trial, right, facing
wild times.
The guillotine.
Wild times.
But notice the pattern, right? It's not like any warmongers are getting killed. It's not like any people who are talking peace or negotiated solutions. It's only the ones who are against any war, like Rasputin, and I think Jaurès in some ways would fill the bill on that, or people like Pollio, the Italian, who he wants to be with the Germans and the Austrians. So there's and of course Franz Ferdinand is hated by the British because the one possible way of calming the Balkans would have been to have this third leg of the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy, right? You have Vienna, you have Budapest, but you could then have some other, something for the Slavs, right? So you'd have the Germans, the Hungarians, the Slavs, and then it would calm down and take the wind out of the sails of Serbia. So that's the kind of climate. And that's a summary that I don't think has been heard in many a year.
No, probably never.
Probably never. Right?
No, seriously. All right, thank you.
Some of it's original, but these guys have been known, but there's been a lot of original stuff, but not the pattern. The pattern I think you've heard tonight is new.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay.
Talk soon.
See you in a month,
okay.
if all goes well.
Indeed. All right, Webster. Good night. Thanks.